Fascinating conversation about the parallels and yet at the same time the tension on the issue of war and peace between King and Obama.
Tavis, let's go in your special, your PBS special that's airing on Wednesday night, to your colleague, our colleague, Cornel West, the professor of religion and African American studies at Princeton University.
Here he was shouting a voice, prophetic voice in the wilderness, and he knew the sleepwalking was increasing. What he didn't know was that the sleepwalking would get thicker and thicker during the age of Reagan. And what he didn't know, that there was a black man on the way to the White House in 2009 and was hoping that there would be some awakening connected to his legacy of focusing on poor people and working people and jobs and homes and studying war no more. Not because a president would be pacifist, because it upset me when I heard my dear brother Barack Obama criticize Martin on the global stage, saying that Martin Luther King Jr.'s insights were not useful for a commander-in-chief because evil exists, as if Martin Luther King Jr. didn't know about evil. Martin Luther King Jr. was fighting terrorism. He was an anti-terrorist. He was fighting Jim Crow and Jane Crow. Martin Luther King Jr. knew something about evil, more so than many of us, including our beloved president. But he also knew that if you don't break the cycle of domination and bigotry and hatred and try to exemplify some alternative, then that cycle would be reinforced in such a way that you would be a pro-war president, pro-war citizen, and not giving peace a chance.
That was Professor Cornel West of Princeton University. Tavis Smiley.
Yeah, Dr. West, as always, is powerful and provocative in terms of raising unsettling questions for us to wrestle with. We go on to talk to Dr. West and others in this special, Amy, about how it is that the world can be made safe for the legacy of Dr. King when you have this tension between an African-American president who's linked with King on the world stage, as Dr. West just suggested, if not intentionally, certainly unintentionally diminishing King and his philosophy, that Gandhian philosophy of satyagraha, of nonviolence. And so it's again, a fascinating tension point here in the conversation. What King was trying to get across, as you know, Amy, in that speech in '67 at Riverside, was not just that the war was wrong, but that the war was distracting us. The war in Vietnam was distracting us from the war on poverty here at home. And one can make again, it's going to be fascinating for viewers to see this on Wednesday and to see, again, how similar conditions are that King was addressing in '67 and where we are, believe it or not, in 2010. So much of our resource in this country has been sent to these wars abroad, to Afghanistan, to Iraq, and now to Pakistan. And those resources being sent abroad make it very, very difficult to focus in on the issue of poverty, escalating poverty, quite frankly, in this recession right here at home. When you talk about these drones, Danny Glover got in trouble some months ago for suggesting that he didn't see much difference between Obama's war policy and Bush's war policy, and people tried to castigate and demonize Danny Glover for making those comments. Well, when you look at the facts, we're escalating our troop presence in Afghanistan, and here we should say that this is a campaign promise kept by President Obama. No surprise here. He promised to do that, but there's still some real questions here about what cost that we are doing this at and whether or not this is now a war of necessity or a war of choice. But he did promise to do this, and there were some of us who were disturbed by it then, but campaign promise kept. But in Pakistan, he has increased, as you know, the use of these U.S. drones, and every time one of these drones goes awry, it goes askew, it doesn't hit the intended target, it kills innocent women and children, and that turns future generations of young folk against America. So this stuff is a never-ending cycle of violence. King came to the point, even though, as you mentioned earlier, those in his own camp, many of them advised him not to give this speech. They said, how can you offend President Johnson, who's been our best friend on civil rights and human rights and voting rights? How can you do this? Martin, this is going to cause problems. And I said earlier, black leaders turned against him. But what pulled Dr. King in to address this issue so directly and so strongly, Amy, was the children. When he saw the photos of the children being victimized by the napalm, he could no longer be silent. His conscience called him to Riverside because of the children. So here we are now in 2010, 40-some years later, almost 45 years later, turning future generations of children against us every time we innocently kill their mother, their father, their loved ones, their sisters, their brothers. So the parallels, I sound like a broken record here because it's even mind-boggling for me, having produced the piece, to just look at America then, look at America now, and really ask on the question of war and peace, how much progress have we really made?
I wanted to go back to your documentary, Beyond Vietnam, to another clip of Professor Cornel West talking about President Obama.
But I think that they're in very different lanes, and they have very different callings. Barack Obama presently is the brilliant, charismatic, smiling, friendly face of the American empire. Martin Luther King Jr. was the courageous, sacrificial, smiling, friendly face that was crushed by the American empire. The latter is a prophet. The former is politician.
Strong words. Professor West calling Obama the face of empire as we look at him addressing the troops and then meeting with President Karzai in Afghanistan when what many are now calling Obama's war.
Yeah, again, back to this word, parallels. The parallels of what this president is doing on the issue of war and peace. And again, we could not have known that President Obama was going to touch down in Afghanistan, but the timing is on point. We hope this special is going to raise some powerful questions about U.S. foreign policy. And again, at what cost? At what cost, number one, are these wars of necessity at this point, or are they wars of choice? And what agency does the American people have in trying to redirect this president on the question of war and peace? I want to go back to King, though, to Dr. West's comparison of Obama and King. King understood very clearly that there was a cost, Amy, to being a truth teller. Being these are my words now, but being in the public square, put another way, being in the public eye, being a leader of people in America means that you find yourself every day, I think, in a battle of truth versus power. Truth versus power. And the question is whether or not you're going to be a truth teller or a power grabber. But if you are going to be committed to telling truth, King understood, as we must understand today, that there are consequences to being a truth teller. And Martin King endured those consequences in the latter years, latter days of his life. He had to endure that. And yet, one of the pieces that comes out in the special on Wednesday night that, again, I think will shock most Americans is that even though King had almost 3/4, Amy, of the American people turn against him, 55% of his own people turned against him. One of the last calls, we lay this out in the special Wednesday night, one of the last calls, Amy, he made from room 306 at the Lorraine Motel where he was staying, as we know, in Memphis. One of the last phone calls he made was back to his church in Atlanta, Ebenezer, which he co-pastored, as you know, with his father, Daddy King. And King told his father that when he got home Sunday from Memphis, so they could type it in the Sunday morning church bulletin, King told his father that his sermon topic was going to be, had he lived, why America may go to hell. Why America may go to hell. He was going to tie that speech to those 3 points he'd raised a year earlier: escalating militarism, increasing poverty, and damning racism in this country. And we think of Dr. King. Dr. West in this special, Amy, uses this phrase that only West could use. I call it, it's Westian to the core. But he talks, Amy, about the Santa Clausification of Dr. King. I'll let him unpack that Wednesday night. What he means by that, though, is that we have tamed and defanged and manicured and deodorized Dr. King so much that we reduced him to a dreamer. In many ways, the same thing that's being done to Mandela now in South Africa, as if these men, Mandela and King, were not freedom fighters who were willing to pay a cost, indeed in Martin's case, the price of death, for standing in his truth. But to have that kind of pushback for being a truth teller, and then to tell your daddy, your co-pastor, that on Sunday morning you're going to preach a sermon with all the hell you're catching still in